Tonight's episode is a compilation focusing on kindness and compassion during the Thanksgiving holidays. Bert's Thanksgiving by J.T. Trowbridge. At noon on a dreary November day, a lonesome little fellow, looking very red about the ears and very blue about the mouth, stood kicking his heels at the door of a cheap eating house in Boston and offering a solitary copy of a morning paper for sale to the people passing. But there were really not many people passing, for it was Thanksgiving Day and the shops were shut, and everybody who had a home to go to and a dinner to eat seemed to have gone home to eat that dinner, while Bert Hampton, the newsboy, stood trying in vain to sell the last extra left on his hands by the dull business of the morning. An old man with a face that looked pinched and who was dressed in a seedy black coat and a much battered stovepipe hat stopped at the same doorway and, with one hand on the latch, appeared to hesitate between hunger and a sense of poverty before going in. It was possible, however, that he was considering whether he could afford himself the indulgence of a morning paper, seeing it was Thanksgiving Day, so at least Bert thought, and accosted him accordingly. "Buy a paper, sir. All about the fire in East Boston and arrest of safe burglars in Springfield. Only 2 cents. The little old man looked at the boy with keen gray eyes, which seemed to light up the pinched and skinny face, and answered in a shrill voice that whistled through white front teeth. "You ought to come down in your price this time of day. You can't expect to sell a morning paper at 12 o'clock for full price." "Well, give me a cent then," said Bert. "That's less in cost, but never mind. I'm bound to sell out anyhow." "You look cold," said the old man. "Cold?" replied Bert. "I'm froze, and I want my dinner, and I'm going to have a big dinner too, seeing it's Thanksgiving Day." "Ah, lucky for you, my boy," said the old man. "You've a home to go to and friends too, I hope." "No, sir, nary a home and nary a friend, only my mother." Bert hesitated and grew serious, then suddenly changed his tone. "And Hop Houghton. I told him to meet me here and we'd have a first-rate Thanksgiving dinner together, for it's no fun to be eatin' alone on Thanksgiving Day. It sets a feller of thinking of everything, if he ever had a home, and then he ain't got a home any more." "It's more lonesome not to eat at all," said the old man, his gray eyes twinkling. "And what can a boy like you have to think of? Here, I guess I can find 1 cent for you, though there's nothing in the paper, I know." The old man spoke with some feeling. His fingers trembled, and somehow he dropped 2 cents instead of 1 into Bert's hand. "Here, you've made a mistake," cried Bert. "A bargain's a bargain. You've given me a cent too much." "No, I didn't. I never give anybody a cent too much." "But here, see?" And Bert showed the 2 cents, offering to return 1. "No matter," said the old man. "It will be so much less for my dinner, that's all." Bert had instinctively pocketed the pennies when, on a moment's reflection, his sympathies were excited. "Poor old man," he thought. "He's seen better days, I guess. Perhaps he's no home. A boy like me can stand it, but I guess it must be hard for him. He meant to give me that odd cent all the while, and I don't believe he has had a decent dinner for many a day." All this, which I have been obliged to write out slowly in words, went through Bert's mind like a flash. He was a generous little fellow, and any kindness shown him, no matter how trifling, made his heart overflow. "Look here," he cried, "where are you going to get your dinner today?" "I can get a bite here as well as anywhere. It don't matter much to me," replied the old man. "Dine with me," said Bert, laughing. "I'd like to have you." "I'm afraid I couldn't afford to dine as you are going to," said the man with a smile, his eyes twinkling again and his white front teeth shining. "I'll pay for your dinner," Bert exclaimed. "Come, we don't have a Thanksgiving but once a year, and a feller wants a good time then." "But you are waiting for another boy." "Oh, Hop Houghton. He won't come now. It's too late. He's gone to a place down in North Street, I guess, a place I don't like. There's so much tobacco smoke and so much beer drank there." Bert cast a final glance up the street. "No, he won't come now. So much the worse for him. He likes the men down there. I don't." Ah, said the man, taking off his hat and giving it a brush with his elbow as they entered the restaurant, as if trying to appear as respectable as he could in the eyes of a newsboy of such fastidious taste. To make him feel quite comfortable in his mind on that point, Bert hastened to say, I mean rowdies and such. Poor people, if they behave themselves, are just as respectable to me as rich folk. I ain't the least mite aristocratic. Ah, indeed. And the old man smiled again and seemed to look relieved. I'm very glad to hear it. He placed his hat on the floor and took a seat opposite Bert at a little table which they had all to themselves. Bert offered him the bill of fare. No, I must ask you to choose for me, but nothing very extravagant, you know. I'm used to plain fare. So am I, but I'm going to have a good dinner for once in my life, and so shall you, cried Bert generously. What do you say to chicken soup and then wind up with a thumping big piece of squash pie? How's that for Thanksgiving dinner? Sumptuous, said the old man, appearing to glow with the warmth of the room and the prospect of a good dinner. But won't it cost you too much? Too much? No, sir, laughed Bert. Chicken soup, 15 cents. Pie, they give tremendous pies here. Thick, I tell you. 10 cents. That's 25 cents. Half a dollar for two. Of course, I don't do this way every day in the year, but Mother's glad to have me once in a while. Here, waiter! And Bert gave his princely order as if it were no very great thing for a liberal young fellow like him after all. Where is your mother? Why don't you dine with her? The little man asked. Bert's face grew somber in a moment. That's the question. Why don't I? I'll tell you why I don't. I've got the best mother in the world. What I'm trying to do is make a home for her so we can live together and eat our Thanksgiving dinners together sometime. Some boys want one thing, some another. There's one goes in for good times. Another's in such a hurry to get rich, he don't care much how he does it. But what I want most of anything is to be with my mother and my two sisters again. And I ain't ashamed to say so. Bert's eyes grew very tender, and he went on, while his companion across the table watched him with a very gentle, searching look. I haven't been with her now for 2 years, hardly at all since Father died. When his business was settled up, he kept a grocery store on Hanover Street. It was found he hadn't left us anything. We had lived pretty well up to that time, and I and my two sisters had been to school. But when Mother had to do something, and her friends got her places to go out nursing, and she's a nurse now, everybody likes her, and she has enough to do. We couldn't be with her, of course. She got us boarded at a good place, but I saw how hard it was going to be for her to support us, so I said, I'm a boy. I can do something for myself. You just pay their board and keep 'em to school, and I'll go to work and maybe help you a little, besides taking care of myself. What could you do? Said the old little man. That's it. I was only 11 years old. And what could I do? What I should have liked would have been some nice place where I could do light work and stand a chance of learning a good business. But beggars can't be choosers. I couldn't find such a place, and I wasn't going to be loafing about the streets, so I went to selling newspapers. I've sold newspapers ever since, and I shall be 12 years old next month. You like it? Said the old man. I like to get my own living, replied Bert proudly. But what I want is to learn some trade or regular business and settle down and make a home for... But there's no use talking about that. Make the best of things. That's my motto. Don't this soup smell good? And don't it taste good too? They haven't put so much chicken in yours as they have in mine. If you don't mind my having tasted it, we'll change. The old man declined this liberal offer, took Bert's advice to help himself freely to bread, which didn't cost anything, and ate his soup with prodigious relish, as it seemed to Bert, who grew more and more hospitable and patronizing as the repast proceeded. Come now, won't you have something between the soup and the pie? Don't be afraid, I'll pay for it. Thanksgiving don't come but once a year. You won't? A cup of tea, then, to go with your pie? I think I will have a cup of tea. You are so kind, said the old man. All right. Here, waiter. 2 pieces of your fattest and biggest squash pie and a cup of tea, strong, for this gentleman. I've told you about myself, added Bert. Suppose now you tell me something. About myself? Yes, I think that would go pretty well with the pie. But the man shook his head. I could go back and tell you about my plans and hopes when I was a lad of your age, but it would be too much like your own story over again. Life isn't what we think it will be when we are young. You'll find that out soon enough. I am all alone in the world now, and I am 67 years old. Have some cheese with your pie, won't you? It must be so lonely at your age. What do you do for a living? I have a little place in Devonshire Street. My name is Crooker. You'll find me up 2 flights of stairs, back room at the right. Come and see me, and I'll tell you all about my business, and perhaps help you to such a place as you want, for I know several businessmen. Now, don't fail. And Mr. Crooker wrote his address with a little stub of a pencil on a corner of the newspaper which had led to their acquaintance, tore it off carefully, and gave it to Bert. Thereupon the latter took a card from his pocket. Not a very clean one, I must say. I'm speaking of the card, though the remark will apply equally well to the pocket, and handed it across the table to his new friend. Herbert Hampton, dealer in newspapers, the old man read with his sharp gray eyes, which glanced up funnily at Bert, seeming to say, "Isn't this rather aristocratic for a 12-year-old newsboy?" Bert blushed and explained. Got up for me by a printer's boy I know. I'd done some favors for him, so he made me a few cards. Handy to have sometimes, you know. Well, Herbert, said the little old man, I'm glad to have made your acquaintance. The pie was excellent. Not any more, thank you. And I hope you will come and see me. You'll find me in very humble quarters, but you are not aristocratic, you say. Now, won't you let me pay for my dinner? I believe I have money enough. Let me see. Bert would not hear of such a thing, but walked up to the desk and settled the bill with the air of a person who did not regard a trifling expense. When he looked around again, the little old man was gone. Never mind, I'll go and see him the first chance I have, said Bert as he looked at the penciled strip of newspaper margin again before putting it in his pocket. He then went round to his miserable quarters in the top of a cheap lodging house, where he made himself ready by means of soap and water and a broken comb to walk 5 miles into the suburbs and get a sight, if only for 5 minutes, of his mother. On the following Monday, Bert, having a leisurely hour, went to call on his new acquaintance in Devonshire Street. Having climbed the 2 flights, he found the door of the back room at the right ajar, and looking in, saw Mr. Crooker at a desk in the act of receiving a roll of money from a well-dressed visitor. Bert entered unnoticed and waited till the money was accounted and a receipt signed. Then, as the visitor departed, old Mr. Crooker looked round and saw Bert. He offered him a chair, then turned to lock up the money in a safe. "So, this is your place of business?" said Bert, glancing about the plain office room. "What do you do here?" "I buy real estate sometimes, sell, rent, and so forth." "Who for?" asked Bert. "For myself," said little old Mr. Crooker with a smile. Bert stared, perfectly aghast at the situation. This, then, was the man whom he had invited to dinner and treated so patronizingly the preceding Thursday. I thought you was a poor man." "I am a poor man," said Mr. Crooker, locking his safe. "Money doesn't make a man rich. I've money enough. I own houses in the city. They give me something to think of, and so keep me alive. I had truer riches once, but I lost them long ago." From the way the old man's voice trembled and his eyes glistened, Bert thought he must have meant by these riches friends he had lost, wife and children, perhaps. "To think of me inviting you to dinner!" the boy cried, abashed and ashamed. It was odd, and Mr. Crooker showed his white front teeth with a smile. but it may turn out to have been a lucky circumstance for both of us. I like you. I believe in you, and I have an offer to make you. I want a trusty, bright boy in this office. Somebody I can bring up to my business and leave it with as I get too old to attend it myself. What do you say? What could Bert say? Again, that afternoon he walked, or rather ran, to his mother, and after consulting with her, joyfully accepted Mr. Crooker's offer. Interviews between his mother and his employer soon followed, resulting in something for which at first the boy had not dared to hope. The lonely, childless old man who owned so many houses wanted a home, and one of these houses he offered to Mrs. Hampton, with ample support for herself and her children, if she would also make it a home for him. Of course, this proposition was accepted, and Bert soon had the satisfaction of seeing the great ambition of his youth accomplished. He had employment which promised to become a profitable business, as indeed it did in a few years. He and the old man proved so useful to each other, and, more than that, he was united once more with his mother and sisters in a happy home where he has since had a good many Thanksgiving dinners. The night before Thanksgiving. Sarah Orne Jewett. There was a sad heart in the low-storied, dark little house that stood humbly by the roadside under some tall elms. Small as her house was, old Mrs. Robb found it too large for herself alone. She only needed the kitchen and a tiny bedroom that led out of it, and there still remained the best room and a bedroom with a low garret overhead. There had been a time after she was left alone when Mrs. Robb could help those who were poorer than herself. She was strong enough not only to do a woman's work inside her house, but almost a man's work outside in her piece of garden ground. At last, sickness and age had come hand in hand, those two relentless enemies of the poor, and together they had wasted her strength and substance. She had always been looked up to by her neighbors as being independent, but now she was left lame-footed and lame-handed, with a debt to carry and her bare land, and the house ill-provisioned to stand the siege of time. For a while she managed to get on, but at last it began to be whispered about that there was no use for anyone so proud. It was easier for the whole town to care for her than for a few neighbors, and Mrs. Robb had better go to the poorhouse before winter and be done with it. At this terrible suggestion, her brave heart seemed to stand still. The people whom she cared for most happened to be poor, and she could no longer go into their households to make herself of use. The very elms overheard and seemed to say, "Oh, no," as they groaned in the late autumn winds, and there was something appealing even to the strange passer-by in the look of the little gray house, with Mrs. Robb's pale, worried face in the window. Someone had said that anniversaries are days to make other people happy in, but sometimes, when they come, they seem to be full of shadows and the power of giving joy to others. That inalienable right which ought to lighten the saddest heart, the most indifferent sympathy, sometimes even this seems to be withdrawn. So poor old Mary Ann Robb sat at her window on the afternoon before Thanksgiving and felt herself poor and sorrowful indeed. Across the frozen road she looked eastward over a great stretch of cold meadow land, brown and windswept and crossed by icy ditches. It seemed to her as if before this, in all the troubles that she had known and carried, there had always been some hope to hold, as if she had never looked poverty full in the face and seen its cold and pitiless look before. She looked anxiously down the road with a horrible shrinking and dread at the thought of being asked, out of pity, to join in some Thanksgiving feast, but there was nobody coming with gifts in hand. Once she had been full of love for such days, whether at home or abroad, but something chilled her very heart now. Her nearest neighbor had been foremost of those who wished her to go to the town farm, and he had said more than once that it was the only sensible thing. But John Mander was waiting impatiently to get her tiny farm into his own hands. He had advanced some money upon it in her extremity and pretended that there was still a debt, after he cleared her woodlot to pay himself back. He would plow over the graves in the field corner and fell the great elms, and waited now like a spider for his poor prey. He often reproached her for being too generous to worthless people in the past, and coming to be a charge to others now. Oh, if she could only die in her own house and not suffer the pain of homelessness and dependence. It was just at sunset, and as she looked out hopelessly across the gray fields, there was a sudden gleam of light far away on the low hills beyond. The clouds opened in the west and let the sunshine through. One lovely gleam shot swift as an arrow and brightened a far cold hillside where it fell. And at the same moment, a sudden gleam of hope brightened in the winter landscape of her heart. There was Johnny Harris, said Mary Ann Robb softly. He was a soldier's son, left an orphan and distressed. Old John Mander scolded, but I couldn't see the poor boy in want. I kept him that year after he got hurt, spite of what anybody said, and he helped me what little he could. He said I was the only mother he'd ever had. I'm going out west, Mother Robb, says he, and I shan't come back till I get rich, and then he'd look at me and laugh. So pleasant and boyish. He wasn't one that liked to write. I don't think he was doing very well when I heard. There, it's almost 4 years ago now. I always thought if he got sick or anything, I should have a good home for him to come to. There's poor Ezra Blake, the deaf one, too. He won't have any place to welcome him. The light faded out of doors, and again Mrs. Robb's troubles stood before her. Yet it was not so dark as it had been in her sad heart. She still sat by the window, hoping now, in spite of herself, instead of fearing, and a curious feeling of nearness and expectancy made her feel not so much light-hearted as light-headed. I feel just as if something was gonna happen, she said. Poor Johnny Harris. Perhaps he's thinking of me. If he's alive. It was dark out now out of doors, and there were tiny clicks against the window. It was beginning to snow, and the great elms creaked in the rising wind overhead. A dead limb of one of the old trees had fallen that autumn, and, poor firewood as it might be, it was Mrs. Robb's own, and she had burnt it most thankfully. There was only a small armful left, but at least she could have the luxury of a fire. She had a feeling that it was her last night at home, and with a strange recklessness began to fill the stove as she used to in better days. I'll get me good and warm, she said, still talking to herself, as lonely people do, and I'll go to bed early. It's coming on to storm. The snow clicked faster and faster against the window, and she sat alone, thinking in the dark. There's lots of folks I love, she said once. They'll be sorry I ain't got nobody to come, and no supper the night before Thanksgiving. I'm dreadful glad they don't know. And she drew a little nearer to the fire and laid her head back drowsily in the old rocking chair. It seemed only a moment before there was a loud knocking, and somebody lifted the latch of the door. The fire shone bright through the front of the stove and made a little light in the room, but Mary Ann Robb waked up frightened and bewildered. "Who's there?" she called as she found her crutch and went to the door. She was only conscious of her one great fear. "They've come to take me to the poorhouse," she said, and burst into tears. There was a tall man, not John Mander, who seemed to fill the narrow doorway. "Come, let me in," he said gaily. "It's a cold night. You didn't expect me, did you, Mother Robb?" "Dear me, what is it?" she faltered, stepping back as he came in and dropping her crutch. "Be I dreamin'? I was a dreamin' about... Oh, there, what was I a-sayin'? 'Tain't true. Nope, I made some kind of mistake." Yes, and this was the man who kept the poorhouse, and she would go without complaint. They might have given her notice, but she must not fret. "Sit down, sir," she said, turning toward him with a touching patience. "If I'd been notified, I wouldn't have kept you waiting a minute this stormy night." It was not the keeper of the poorhouse. The man by the door took one step forward and put his arm around her and kissed her. "What are you talking about?" said John Harris. "You ain't going to make me feel like a stranger. I've come all the way from Dakota to spend Thanksgiving. There's all sorts of things out there in the wagon, and a man to help get 'em in. Why, don't cry so, Mother Robb. I thought you'd have a great laugh if I come and surprised you. Don't you remember I always said I should come?" It was John Harris, indeed. The poor soul could say nothing. She felt now as if her heart was going to break with joy. He left her in the rocking chair and came and went in his old boyish way, bringing in stores of gifts and provisions. It was better than any dream. He laughed and talked and went out to send away the man to bring a wagon full of wood from John Manders, and came in himself laden with pieces of the nearest fence to keep the fire going in the meantime. They must cook the beefsteak for supper right away. They must find a pound of tea among all the other bundles. They must get good fire started in both the cold bedrooms. Why, Mother Rob didn't seem to be ready for company from out west. The great cheerful fellow hurried about the tiny house, and the old woman limped after him, forgetting everything but hospitality. Had not she a house for John to come to? Were not her old chairs and tables in their places still? And he remembered everything, and kissed her as they stood before the fire, as if she were a girl. He had found plenty of hard times, but luck had come at last. He had struck luck, and this was the end of a great year. No, I couldn't seem to write letters. No use to complain of the worst, and I wanted to tell you the best when I came. And he told it when she cooked supper. Nope, I wasn't going to write no foolish letters, repeated John. He was afraid he should cry himself when he found out how bad things had been, and they sat down to supper together, just as they used to do when he was a homeless orphan boy, whom nobody else wanted in winter weather while he was crippled and could not work. She could not be kinder now than she was then, but she looked so poor and old. He saw her taste a cup of tea and set it down again with trembling hand and a look at him. "No, I wanted to come myself," he blustered, wiping his eyes and trying to laugh. "And you're going to have everything you need to make you comfortable long as you live, Mother Rob." She looked at him again and nodded, but she did not even try to speak. There was a good hot supper ready, and a happy guest had come. It was the night before Thanksgiving.